Hey, welcome to our Erev Shabbat class, Parashat Ha'azinu, nestled this year in between the Holy Yom Kippurim and the Happy Hag Sukkot, as it turns out, many years. Justifying history, that is what we find is presented to us in Parashat Ha'azinu. Parashat Ha'azinu is the song for the ages. It is one of the few presentations of the Torah in song fashion, the way it's written, the way it's presented actually on the cloth in the parchment of a Sefer Torah. And the Torah tells us, it introduces us from last week's Parashat Vayelech that this song is coming, and this song will be a testimony, a song for the ages, a song which Am Yisrael can reflect upon, and Hashem can say, I told you so, a song which goes through Jewish history. And as we're going to demonstrate this morning, a small part of it offers Hashem's justification of all that he has perpetrated to Am Yisrael throughout history. In other words, a justification for destructions and crusades and expulsions and inquisitions and pogroms and holocausts and every difficult tragedy that has befallen the Jewish people. HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this parasha says, don't look at me. And the focus, that's the general spirit throughout the parasha, but like a laser beam, there's two pesukim that really focus on that idea and actually present different reasons why HaKadosh Baruch Hu is justified in acting the way that he has vis-a-vis Am Yisrael over history. Just to give the dressing and the context around those two pesukim, this parasha, Ha'azinu, opens in chapter 32, Lamed Bet, and at the end of the book of Devarim, essentially the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. The first three pesukim are, you can call introductory pesukim, and then starting from pasuk vav, pasuk 6, verse 6, HaKadosh Baruch Hu begins to go through the history of Am Yisrael from the early decision of God to choose Am Yisrael amongst the nation, to separate them and exalt them as a unique nation, to embrace them, to extract them and redeem them, and then bring them miraculously through desert life, and eventually to give them the land, only for them to act unfaithfully to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to rebel against his word, and to, so to speak, anger him, and to have a lack of foresight, which resulted, of course, will result from the perspective of this song and its point of history, which will result in the exposure of Am Yisrael to their enemies, to tragedy, to unthinkable and really illogical type of oppression and antagonizing of the Jewish people. The parasha is almost shocked at itself, the way it describes how could this happen. And then eventually the futuristic justice of God as he takes vengeance against the enemies, shows himself to be God, even hinting at the end of this parasha, not just to redemption, but to Hayat HaMetim, to the very event of the resurrection of the dead. But all that history is preceded by two pesukim, pasuk Dalet and pasuk He, verse 4 and 5, which we'll now read, translate, and then demonstrate the different angles as to how HaKadosh Baruch Hu justifies in these two pesukim all his actions and decisions. Pasuk Dalet is a famous pesukim. Hasur tamim pa'olo ki choderachav mishpat el emunah ve'en avel sadiq v'yashadu. Hasur, a tricky word, refers to God, the rock perhaps. Tamim pa'olo, his actions are tamim, are complete, are flawless. Ki choderachav mishpat, all his ways of justice. El emunah ve'en avel, a faithful, truthful God with no evil. Sadiq v'yashadu, he's righteous and yashar, forthright. Pasuk He, Shehed lo banav mumam. Dor Itesh Uftaltol. You could say this in a question form. Shehed Lo is destruction emanating from him. Is he the cause of impending tragedy? No. Banav Mumam, the flaw, the blemish is in his children. And generation, or perhaps generations, but starting with a rebellious generation and then moving on throughout history. You can say literally crooked and twisted. People that have lacked moral activity and way of life, and instead acted in all types of corrupt and perverse manners. Okay, let's focus and mainly on Pasuk Dalet, and we're going to see that in these two Pesukim, there is Jewish theology, Jewish philosophy, Jewish history, and all combining together from different angles to allow Kadosh Baruch Hu to justify all that he has done in terms of allowing the tragedy to befall tragedies and unthinkable calamities to befall the Jewish people throughout history. So let's just start with the angle of Rashi and the Ramban, which is very basic. It's the ways of God. And that is to say, Hasur here refers to God. According to most opinions, it means the rock, and that is the description of Hashem as the source of strength and power. Tamin Paulo, meaning that even though he has the ability to act with power and enact a retribution, punishment, right? But Tamim Paulo, which means that he does everything, all his actions are perfect and just. They're all through perfect justice. El Emunah ben Avil, as Rashi explains, that this refers to the fact that God is always faithful to issue proper reward to those who deserve. Even though it doesn't seem that way all the time, even though it seems like the righteous are being delayed in what is given to them, and in fact, quite to the contrary, well, sometimes even enduring suffering, he's emunah, he's faithful, and all will receive what is coming to them. El hane'eman. And Avel, no evil, so much so that even the evil people receive reward for that which they deserve from their righteous activity in this world. So much so. And Avil, meaning that even the Risha'im who seem to be evil, he still finds a way to offer goodness to them in terms of what they deserve. Sadiq B'Yashahu, Rashi says that people eventually will realize God's perfect justice, and they will accept upon themselves all of his decision-making with people throughout the ages. Ramban, a little bit of a different angle in terms of the activity of God, where he says, Hasur Tamim Pa'olah, rock, meaning God, his actions are perfect. That is relating to Midat Hadin, to God's measure and character of exact judgment, meaning that Tamim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses judgment like a perfect judge who makes no mistakes, and that's the way he acts with Bnei Adam and with Am Yisrael. Tamim means consistent as well. His justice and his judgment is completely consistent. It never alters. It never sways. He uses his same approach and methodology all the time in his reaction to people. On the other hand, the other part of that first half of the pasuk, Kichol derachav mishpat, is reminiscent of Midat Rahamim, his character and approach of mercy, which mixes with Midat Hadin somehow, some way. Interesting that the word mishpat, which means justice normally, simply speaking, is actually hinting and implying, according to the Ramban, Midat Rahamim. And we see this also, according to him at least, in Abraham Avinu's prayer on Sodom v'Amorah, he says, Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. Will the judge of the world not enact mishpat? There, according to him, Abraham Avinu was alluding to not just actual hardcore letter of the law judgment, but because God is the God of mishpat, by definition, Melech Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat, he is the king that uses rachamim with deen. And that what this phrase called the Rechad Mishpat is implying to us, that he has no evil, and that rachamim, mercy, is always mixed in the formula of the way God behaves with judgment as well. Okay, the ways of God. There is another perspective, and that is God as creator vis-a-vis man. And in that regard, the Kli Yakad takes an angle where the word sur, and sur here is the key word, because using it with different etymology, with different background of possible root words of that three-letter word, root meanings, sadi, vav, resh, you come up with different meanings. So first we said sur is the rock, the strength, God, the almighty and all-powerful. Kli Yakad says you could also use sur from the root lisayer, which means to craft, to mold, or create. Now, man may have a contention against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, possibly. And that is, listen, God, you created me, you crafted me, and when you did, you, the way you programmed me and you wired me is with this inclination, this yetzer hara, which gives me the potential to do evil. And therefore, you may be the misayer, the sculptor of man. I can turn to you and say, what are you punishing me for? As a reaction to my wrongdoings. Aren't you my sculptor? Aren't you my creator? Didn't you instill in me the physical makeup that gave me these desires and that caused me then to pursue evil? And perhaps then the evil and the destruction is sourced in you and not me. And to that, the Torah reacts and says, or preempts that wrongful thought and says, no, Hasur Tamim Ha'olah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created man, yes, with a yetzer hara, but Tamim. There's no chisaron. There's nothing missing. There's no flaw in man. And of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I can prove this, gives man every single opportunity, and that yetzer hara is inevitably used for the positive for him to take advantage of opportunities. Now, you all admit the continuation of the pasuk, Ki chol derechad mishpat. In other words, you'll never want to lose your reward for doing well, would you? And every human being would have to admit that when he is receiving goodness, when God's bestowing upon him reward, that this obviously is God's demonstration of mishpat. Kol derechad mishpat. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to such an extent, you see even the Sha'im receiving reward. How about that for Mishpat? So if you're going to admit the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the king of Mishpat and the king of justice, so obviously that is even being given to the so-called flawed being that you're speaking about, that he created with a malfunction, so to speak, that caused him to do sin. But you are admitting, man, that kol derechad mishpat, that he's already enacting justice through his reward. That part, since you admit that part, you must admit that he's kulo mishpat. And therefore, you reflect back now, Hasur, this misayer, this creator, therefore, it's all or nothing. If you admit to the mishpat and the reward, tamim pa'olo, then really his action of creation of man, his sculpting of man is tamim, it's without flaw. And the next pasuk tells us, shihet lo banat mumam. And therefore, if they do wrong, and because they have the ability to do good, and they prove it, and I prove it by rewarding them, you know already that they can. And therefore, don't blame me when they do evil, because they have the inclination and the potential, the ability to overcome that and do well. So Hasur, the sculptor, the creator of man, perfect and flawless. Don't ever turn around and blame me because of your flaws. I created you in a manner that's perfect, and there's a reason that you have the potential to do evil. But when you do so, it is on you. Shehet lo banav mumam. The flaw, the blemish is in them. Okay, so that's God the creator vis-a-vis man. Now, the Ketav HaKabbalah takes the word sur and uses it emanating from another root. And that is, Badminam, when someone passes away, we say, his soul should be wrapped in the wrappings of life. And so the word sur, also the root word, is also lasur, means to wrap. And he says that can describe God, that can be used as a verb for God, and also as an adjective. As a verb, it refers to the God that in his creation of the universe as a whole, he wraps. What does wrap mean? It means all modes of creation, be it the celestial beings up in the sky, outer space as we call it, down here on earth, all the humankind, the Homo sapiens, all of the millions of species here, he wraps it all together in a manner that everything is synthesized perfectly, that there is a connectivity where creation is interacting with each other and everything is engaged together, even though there are millions and billions and trillions, including cells and all of components, but it all connects in a most perfect manner and synthesizes as God's single creation, wrapped hasur by the wrapper, by the creator, who makes creation one single creation. And that is the verb. The adjective is to call God the sur, the one who is a wrapper. What does that mean? It means that because of the fact that he is the source, and by the way, we use this in Modim, surenu sur hayenu machenishenu, that he is the source of all life, meaning that the fact that we sit here before you, that our life perpetuates and continues, the continuity of life of all species in this universe is inextricably, it's inevitably attached to the existence of God. Everything's existence and continuity of existence is all because of God's existence. So that is an adjective, a description of God. The sur, the one who exists, you can say, wraps means that he attaches himself to all other being, and his existence explains the existence of everything else. Says Ketav HaKabbalah, Hasur Tamim Pa'olah, this creator, look at the perfection of his universe. Look at the perfection of the continuity of the existence of the universe. All that is in the word sur. How can you possibly, it's so tamim pa'olah, it's so perfect. How can you possibly place blame on something that has such perfection? It must be that no, banav mumam, the flaw in his children. And finally, there's a historical perspective. And that is the Emek Davar, authored by the Nasiv, Rabbi Nasim Sevi, Naftali Sevi Yehuda Berlin, who says famously in his introduction to the book of Bereshit that this pasuk, he actually takes these two pasukim and says that they allude to the destruction of Chorban Beit Rishon, Beit Sheni, of the first and second temples, are both alluded to and hinted to in these two pasukim. And specifically, I'll show you one of them, which is the second temple, which, as we know, was destroyed because of Sinat Hanam, Basil's hatred, as Hachamim tell us. And he describes in his introduction to Bereshit as to why Bereshit's nickname is Sefer HaYashar, the book of the Yashar, because the Avot were called Yesharim. And why the Avot called Yesharim? Because they take off of God's character, and he's called Yashar. And here in this pasuk, it says that Hasur Tamim Pa'olo Ki Kol Deracham Mishpat El Emunah Ve'en Havel Sadiq V'Yasharu. Here, with that phrase, Sadiq V'Yasharu, God comes to justify his decision to destroy the second Bet HaMikdash and thrust us into the exile in which, unfortunately, we still exist for almost 2,000 years. How so? What does that have to do with Yashar? He says as follows: the people in those days, in the time of second Bet HaMikdash, for the most part, they were not idolaters like during the end of the first temple. He didn't destroy them, the Bet HaMikdash, the second one, because of Avodah Zarah, right? They were, for the most part, so to speak, observant people in terms of ritual, in terms of the way it looks in a superficial way. They were what we would call religious people. Shomrei Torah Mizvot. And yet, as he describes, they treated anyone who had a different view than them, anyone that had a different philosophy, a different approach, as crooked, as he says, as apikorsim, as non-believers. It's one way, my way or the highway. And because of that extreme hatred goes another approach. They went as far as even to lead themselves to shitichut damin. In some cases, murder. As we know, all the infighting, there was even murder amongst Jews because it was all what he calls, quote unquote, the Shem Shamayim. Right? The ends justify the means, and I'm doing it for God because they're evil, because their approach is wrong. That is not Yashar. As opposed to the Avot, the forefathers of Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov, who dealt with even the most evil of people, like Abraham praying for Sodom and Amorah, and Ishaq with Abimelech, and Yaakov with Lavan. Even the most evil people treated them as human beings, wanted their better interests, and wanted to bring them closer to God. That's called Yashar. These people, that's the book of Sefer Yashar, Bereshit, because the Avot were Yesharim. As Bil'am refers to them, Tamot Nafshi Mod Yesharim, Utiah Hariti Kamohu. These people in that generation of the Second Temple, they were not Yesharim. And therefore, I made my decision to destroy them because God, me, Sadiq v'Yashar. And they were not emulating my ways. They were the antithesis of forthright Yashar people because of their behavior between man and fellow man. I decided, therefore, it was justified for me to destroy that Second Temple and thrust these people into exile. Just an example how the Emet Avad finds history justification specific for specific events and tragedies in Jewish history embedded in these very two Pesukim that we're discussing right now. So here you have it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the master of the world, justifies his decisions in this parasha as it rolls out future history, and specifically in these two Pesukim, as he's called the Sur, the rock, the sculptor, the creator, the rapper, so to speak, of mankind. And all of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done is based on his perfect character, his perfect activities, his perfect justice, his perfect creation, his flawless way of dealing with mankind. The fault is not his, it is ours. And therefore Hashem, in these two magical, deep and powerful Pesukim, justifies history in Parashat Ha'azinu. Amen v'amen. Shabbat shalom.